Nigeria is today marking 25 years of unbroken democracy at a time when several of its neighbors in West Africa have had military coups. Democracy Day holds particular significance for Nigerians. It falls on June 12th, the anniversary of Nigeria's freest and fairest election, a ballot that was inexplicably annulled by the military government in 1993, denying the winner, Chief Moshood Abiola, his mandate and cracking down on the pro-democracy protests that followed. Speaking earlier today, President Tinubu said Nigerians had kept the fire of democracy burning with their sacrifices and resistance to military dictatorship.
The nation exited the yoke of dictatorship in 1999 to become the most populous democracy on African soil, the beacon of democratic self-determination for the black race and one of the largest democracies in the world. This change stands as a pivotal moment in human history. From this change, we shall never turn, nor shall annals of mankind's progress forget the sublime meaning of this great moment. Today, 25 years later, we celebrate the silver anniversary of our journey in democracy. We have studied the course. Democracy is neither a foreign nor abstract concept devoid of real-life meaning for us. Neither can we afford to reduce or minimize it to being nothing but the mere holding of periodic elections where one candidate and party outdo another.
President Tinubu there. Well, for more on Nigeria's Democracy Day, I'm joined now in the studio by Arise political editor Sumner Sambo. Good to see you, Sumner. Just how significant is this Democracy Day?
Very significant for Nigeria. Like you said earlier, it falls on June 12th, which began sometime in 2018, when then President Muhammadu Buhari had to actually move the Democracy Day from May 29, when the military handed over in 1999, to June 12th to actually make it much more significant. And in on every June 12th, it's a time when activists, academics and other segments of the society actually sit down to take a critical look at what Nigeria's democracy is all about, the health status of the country's democracy, and if the leaders are actually doing what democracy is all about. Because democracy is all about respect for human rights, good governance, and then ensuring that the economy works for the majority of the people. And during this day, it's time for us to actually assess our leaders and to find out if indeed the quality of governance we are getting is synonymous with what the concept and the foundation of democratic practices are. But I'll tell you, Charles, that there can't be democracy without Democrats. Now, what we have in Nigeria seem to be despots, autocrats, people who just want political power for the affluence that comes with it, especially within our own context, African politics, and then
so they're not ideologically driven.
Not ideologically driven. So that's why when they get to power, they forget the content of their own manifestos, and they don't actually make policies for the benefit of the larger majority. Because if the concept of democracy is about good governance for the majority, then how come we have, the huge number of poor people that we have? Compared to when the military were in power, we aren't doing well. Isn't it interesting to you, Charles, that we continue to say that June 12th is the most freest and fairest election that Nigeria has held since 1993? Why shouldn't we, under a democratic government, get a better election?
That's a very good point. And today, of course, as you touched on there, Sumner, I'm wondering, against a backdrop of the rising cost of living, of insecurity, do Nigerians feel they're enjoying the dividends of democracy?
Well, there was actually a survey by the Open Society Foundation, the OSF barometer, sometime last year, which said that about 92% of Nigerians actually still believe in the concept of democracy, and then democracy being the best system of government for the country. Because it gives people, at least, well, you sell hope to people. Even if it's not working the way many citizens expect it to be, but there's that continuous belief that someday we'll get a leader that in 4 years' time will be able to change this country much better than he or she met it. And the thinking is that based on that survey, most Nigerians do not want any military interruption any longer. And most Nigerians would want a situation whereby executive recklessness is actually tackled, because we've had chief executive officers, especially under our presidential system, that seem to be too powerful and too difficult to control. And unless we reduce the powers of the president to be able to be more subject to the people determining and then have governments that can be taken and swept off their feet, it will be difficult, because we have different clauses to actually protect our democracy. But it's not being used. For example, the idea of recalling elected political office holders who don't perform midterm. You will see that the constitutional provisions have been so tightened that it makes it practically difficult to actually recall an elected president or an elected lawmaker. So we need to work more on that. And then our presidential system seems to be more authoritarian, more centered around the person who occupies the executive
rather
office,
than the institutions being strong enough to stand on their own.
And so what we have is that we have presidents that get into power and they begin to develop a monarchical complex. They think they are monarchs in power, and it becomes everybody will just have to be bowing. Even when the president is going wrong, it becomes difficult even for people within the presidency to say the truth to him or her, and for even activists, once they are courted through one or two carrot and stick approach, before you know it, they actually lose guard. So our civil society continues to weaken under our democracy, and we're asking why? Because the civil society was much more stronger under the military. So why is it weakening under a democracy where we have freedom of speech and all of that? So something is wrong with our own form of democracy, and that's why former President Obasanjo is actually saying that maybe we should look at the African concept of Afrocracy. That's his own suggestion. Something that's a mix between the Western concept and then the African concept.
So, but with several West African countries having gone through military coups, is there concern that democracy remains tenuous, if not in Nigeria, but at least in the subcontinent?
Very well, very well. I mean, you could see what happened in Burkina Faso, for example, where, the government had to be sacked, and of course, other West African countries. And people are beginning to question the concept of democracy and not, like I said earlier on, there can't be democracy without Democrats. Now, people get into power and they don't work on behalf of the majority of the people. So you will see that, just like former President Goodluck Jonathan was saying yesterday, you see, when politicians get into power, they would, at some point, when they fail to deliver, be winking at the military. Soldiers, could you do something and all of that? Look, we need to actually reassess the concept of democracy within Africa, because if we are having majority of the people getting poorer and poorer, and democracy, the idea behind democracy is that you have lesser poor people, then it means something is going wrong. So the fundamentals of democracy are not freely being practiced, including in Nigeria now. It will surprise you that journalists like us, if you look at the survey in the last 1 year, more journalists are being asked to be taken to police custody and all of that. Yeah, while journalists themselves have fallen into the temptation to think that they can't be held to account, nonetheless, using police to always harass journalists is something that democracy doesn't permit. So there has to be a win-win solution. While journalists need to be held to account, nonetheless, the military or the security services should not be used to oppress them. And then also the basics, the fundamentals are that people should not go to bed hungry. We have more Nigerians going to bed hungry. We have more Nigerians becoming poorer, leaving the middle class and becoming, the poorest of the poor. And then it becomes difficult when insecurity comes into the mix and people are unable to
Right.
move around. And if you can't move around, what's the concept of democracy?
So there's a question.
Yeah, and that's why you see people
Okay.
sometimes saying that they are being enticed by the idea of having a military government again. But it can't work because
Right.
military is gone and gone forever.
Well, hopefully that won't.
Yeah, I mean, and so that's why those who get themselves into power must be held to account
Right.
so that they don't develop monarchical complex and continue to think they are monarchs in the executive
Right.
chambers, and they get entrapped in the appurtenances of power, and they are unable to deliver
Right.
until the next 4 years when they have to think of re-election.
Okay. Sumner, thank you very much indeed. Sumner Sambo is Arise political editor.